In a quiet village nestled beside rolling green hills lived a man named Mr. Silas Blackwood. He was known throughout the land not for his kindness but for his sharp mind. Mr. Blackwood was very clever. He could solve difficult problems with ease. However, his cleverness served a deep and growing hunger inside him. This hunger was for land. He desired to own every field, every small garden, every piece of earth he could see. His great house stood on a hill, overlooking the smaller homes of the villagers. From there, he would often gaze upon the lands below, his mind always plotting. Mr. Blackwood's appearance matched his stern reputation. He always dressed in dark, expensive clothes. These clothes made him seem even more imposing. His face was often set in a serious expression, rarely smiling. His eyes, small and sharp, darted around, noticing every little detail. They were like the eyes of a hawk, searching for its next prey. When he walked through the village, people would often lower their gaze. They felt a chill when he passed by. His presence was a constant reminder of his power and his unending desire for more. The children would stop their games and hide when they saw his tall figure approaching. The villagers whispered about Mr. Blackwood in hushed tones. They said his heart was as hard as the stones in his grand fireplace. They spoke of how his shadow seemed to stretch further each year, covering more and more of their beloved village. He was not a cruel man in obvious ways. He did not shout or threaten loudly. Instead, he used his clever mind. He used words and papers that ordinary folk could not easily understand. He operated quietly, methodically, like a spider spinning a careful web to catch unsuspecting flies. His name became a symbol of fear and quiet despair among the hard-working people of the village. His cleverness, which could have been used for good, became a tool for his insatiable greed. He found loopholes in old laws. He made promises that sounded fair but had hidden traps. He knew how to talk to people to make them feel confused, and then to make them agree to his terms. The villagers, simple and trusting, often fell for his schemes. They respected cleverness, but they did not understand how it could be used to cause such sorrow. Mr. Blackwood always seemed to win, adding field after field to his vast estate, while the villagers felt their world shrinking around them. Mr. Silas Blackwood had many ways to trick the poor people of the village. His favorite method involved using complicated legal papers. These papers were filled with long words and confusing sentences. The poor villagers who worked hard in their fields did not have much schooling. They could not read these papers well. Sometimes Mr. Blackwood would read parts of the papers aloud, but he would skip the important, tricky parts. He would smile and tell them it was just a formality. Trusting him or feeling they had no other choice, they would make their mark on the paper, not knowing they were signing away their homes or their land. One common trick involved lending money. When a poor farmer had a bad harvest, he might need money to feed his family. Mr. Blackwood would offer a loan. He would seem kind and understanding at first, but the loan papers had very high interest rates hidden in the small print. The farmer, desperate for help, would agree. Soon, the interest would grow so large that the farmer could not possibly pay it back. Then, Mr. Blackwood would calmly explain that the farmer had to give up his land to clear the debt. Many small farms were lost this way. The homes of generations turned over to the greedy landlord. Another sad story was that of a baker's family. They had a small, cozy shop in the village square. They baked delicious bread and cakes. Mr. Blackwood came to them one day. He said he wanted to help them make their shop bigger and better. He spoke of grand plans and more customers. He presented them with a partnership agreement. The family was excited. They signed the papers, dreaming of a brighter future. But the papers gave Mr. Blackwood control of their business. Slowly, he pushed them out. Soon, the shop was his, and the family had nothing left but their broken dreams and empty hands. The despair in the village grew with each new acquisition by Mr. Blackwood. People felt trapped and helpless. Their small pieces of land were not just dirt and grass to them. These lands held their memories, their sweat, and their hopes for their children. Losing their land meant losing a part of themselves. It meant an uncertain future. As Mr. Blackwood's wealth and land holdings grew, the spirit of the village seemed to dim. The songs of the farmers became quieter. The laughter of children became less frequent. The shadow of greed was indeed a heavy one. In a small, sun-dappled corner of the village lived an old woman named Alara. She was known for her gentle smile and her kind heart. Alara lived all by herself in a tiny cottage. The cottage was old, but she kept it very neat and tidy. Its walls were whitewashed and colorful flowers grew around its little wooden door. Though she did not have much in terms of worldly possessions, Alara was rich in spirit. She found joy in simple things, the warmth of the sun, the song of the birds, and the beauty of her small garden. She was a familiar and comforting sight to her neighbors. The piece of land where Alara's cottage stood was very small. It was hardly bigger than a handkerchief, some might say. But to Alara, this tiny plot was the most precious place in the world. Her beloved husband, who had passed away many years ago, had built the cottage with his own 2 hands. Before him, her parents and grandparents had worked this very soil. Every stone, every blade of grass, held a memory for her. It was not just land, it was a tapestry of her life, her love, and her heritage. She felt deeply connected to this little spot on earth. In her small garden, Alara grew the most beautiful flowers. Reds, yellows, and blues bloomed brightly under her care. She also grew vegetables, plump tomatoes, green beans, and sweet carrots. These vegetables often found their way into her simple, wholesome meals. Her garden was not just a source of food, it was her companion. She would spend hours there tending to her plants, talking to them softly. The land gave her a sense of purpose and a deep feeling of peace. It was her sanctuary, her small, perfect world where she felt safe and content. Old Alara was a picture of contentment. She did not long for riches or grand possessions. Her tiny cottage and her beloved garden were enough to make her happy. She often sat on her small porch in the evenings humming old folk songs as the sun set. She believed that if you had enough for your needs, and a little bit of beauty around you, then you had everything. Her neighbors admired her simple wisdom and her cheerful disposition. Despite her age and her modest means, Alara's life was full of a quiet, radiant joy that many richer people could only dream of. One day, Mr. Silas Blackwood's sharp eyes fell upon old Alara's small piece of land. It was, as mentioned, a tiny plot. By itself, it was not worth much to a man who owned vast acres. However, Alara's cottage and garden were situated right next to a large field that Mr. Blackwood had recently acquired. Her land was like a small tooth missing in his otherwise perfect smile of ownership. He wanted it to complete his boundary, to make his vast property look even more impressive and unbroken. The thought of this small independent patch irritated his orderly and greedy mind. Mr. Blackwood believed that acquiring Alara's land would be a simple matter. After all, she was an old woman, living alone. She had no powerful family to protect her, she had little money. He was used to people giving in to his demands, especially those who seemed weak and vulnerable. He imagined she would be easily intimidated or swayed by a small offer of money. He planned his visit to her cottage with his usual confidence. He was certain that by the end of the day, her small haven would be legally his. He did not consider her feelings, only his desire. So, on a bright and sunny morning, when the birds were singing their cheerful songs in the trees, Mr. Blackwood made his way to Alara's cottage. Alara was in her garden as she often was, gently watering her blooming roses. The sun warmed her back and she hummed a soft tune. Suddenly a tall shadow fell over her flowers. She looked up and saw Mr. Blackwood standing at her garden gate. His stern expression was a stark contrast to the cheerful morning. He carried an air of cold business that immediately made Alara feel uneasy. Without much greeting, Mr. Blackwood stated his purpose. He told Alara that he wanted her land. He explained that it would be better if it became part of his larger estate. He offered her a sum of money, a sum that he considered generous but was, in truth, very little for a home and a lifetime of memories. His voice was firm and devoid of any warmth. He made it clear that he expected her to agree. He saw her land as just another piece on his chessboard, and he was ready to make his move. Hearing Mr. Blackwood's words, old Alara felt a sharp pain in her heart. It was as if a cold wind had blown through her soul. Her small cottage, her beloved garden, these were not just things to her. They were her life, her connection to her past, her comfort in her old age. She looked at the rich landlord, her eyes filled with a desperate plea. She had to make him understand. This land was more than just dirt and wood. It was the keeper of all her dearest memories. She clasped her frail hands together, her mind racing to find the right words. "Oh, please, sir," Alara began, her voice soft and trembling slightly. "This little piece of land, this humble cottage, it is everything I have in this world. It means far more to me than any amount of money you could offer. My dear husband, may he rest in peace, built this home with his own hands, beam by beam. My parents tended this soil before me. Every flower, every stone tells a story of my family, of my life. She hoped her words would touch some part of his heart, to make him see beyond the mere size of the plot. But Mr. Silas Blackwood was not a man easily moved by sentiment. Greed had built a strong wall around his heart, a wall that feelings could not easily penetrate. He listened to Alara's plea with a blank expression. He had heard similar stories before. To him, they were just attempts to gain a better price or to delay the inevitable. He shook his head slightly. "I understand your attachment, old woman," he said, though his tone suggested he did not understand at all. "But progress cannot be stopped by feelings. I must have this land. If you do not agree, I will find other ways, legal ways to acquire it." Alara knew then that her words had failed. She felt a deep sense of helplessness wash over her. She was old, and her strength was fading. He was rich, powerful, and determined. How could she possibly fight against him? The laws and rules he spoke of were mysteries to her. Tears welled up in her kind eyes, blurring the image of her beautiful flowers. The thought of leaving her home, her sanctuary, was almost too much to bear. A quiet despair settled upon her, heavy and cold, as she faced the powerful landlord, who seemed to hold her entire world in his unyielding grasp. As despair threatened to overwhelm her, old Alara stood silently for a long moment. Her gaze drifted over her beloved garden, her little cottage, the familiar trees. Then a thought, like a tiny spark in the darkness, flickered in her mind. It was a strange idea, perhaps a foolish one, but it was all she had. She looked up at Mr. Blackwood, her tear-filled eyes now holding a peculiar quiet resolve. She took a deep breath, as if gathering all her remaining strength, and prepared to make a very unusual request to the stern landlord before her. "Sir," she said, her voice a little stronger now, though still tinged with sadness, "if I truly must leave this place, if there is no other way, then I have but one small favor to ask of you. It is not for money nor for another home." She paused, ensuring she had his attention. "Please allow me to take something with me from this land, something to remember it by. Let me fill a sack with the soil from my garden. Just one sack of earth is all I ask to carry away with me." Mr. Silas Blackwood was taken aback by her request. He had expected more arguments, more tears, perhaps a demand for more money. But a sack of soil? He found the idea quite amusing, almost ridiculous. What possible use could an old woman have for a sack of dirt? He let out a short, dry chuckle. He thought her a bit senile, her mind weakened by age and her attachment to this small plot. He considered it a harmless, silly wish, one that cost him nothing and would perhaps make the process of her leaving quicker and smoother. "A sack of soil?" he repeated, a smirk playing on his lips. "Is that truly all you wish for, old woman?" He looked down at her, a mixture of contempt and amusement in his eyes. "Very well, if that will make you content to leave, then by all means take your bag of earth. It makes no difference to me. Consider it a gift." He thought he was being rather magnanimous, indulging the peculiar whim of a simple old lady. He waved his hand dismissively, eager to conclude the matter and be on his way. With Mr. Blackwood's permission, old Alara slowly walked towards her small garden shed. She found a large, sturdy sack, one she usually used for collecting fallen leaves in the autumn. She carried it back to the middle of her beloved garden. Then, with her old worn garden spade, she began to dig. She did not take soil from the surface. Instead, she dug deep, taking the rich, dark earth that had nourished her plants for so many years. Her movements were slow but deliberate, each scoop of soil filled with unspoken sorrow and love for her home. She continued to fill the sack, her frail arms working steadily. The sun climbed higher in the sky, but Alara did not seem to notice the heat. She poured scoop after scoop of the dark, fragrant earth into the sack. The soil that had felt her husband's touch, the soil that had cradled the seeds she planted, the soil that was, in essence, a part of her. Finally, the sack was full, bulging with the weight of her cherished land. She tied the top securely with a piece of twine. It was a very large and heavy sack indeed. With great effort, Alara managed to drag the heavy sack across her garden path, towards where Mr. Blackwood stood waiting, rather impatiently. She was breathing heavily, and her face was flushed. "There, sir," she said, her voice strained from the exertion. "The sack is ready. Now, if you would be so kind as to help me, please, lift this sack of my earth onto your horse, so that I may carry it away with me when I leave this place." She looked at him expectantly, her small request now turning into a challenge of sorts. Mr. Blackwood looked at the sack with some surprise. It was much larger and appeared far heavier than he had imagined a bag of soil would be. He had expected a small, dainty pouch, not this enormous burden. Still, he was a strong man, proud of his physical prowess. He scoffed inwardly at the thought that he might struggle. "Of course," he said, stepping forward confidently. He bent down and gripped the top of the sack. He pulled, expecting it to lift easily, but the sack barely moved. He grunted with effort, his confidence wavering. "This soil! It is surprisingly heavy!" he exclaimed, his face reddening. Old Alara watched Mr. Blackwood struggle with the sack of earth. Her expression was no longer one of simple sadness. Now her eyes held a deep, knowing wisdom. When he finally managed to lift it a few inches, only to set it down heavily again, panting, she spoke. Her voice was quiet, yet it carried a profound weight, much like the soil itself. "Sir," she said, looking directly into his eyes, "if you find it so difficult to carry just this one small sack of my earth, tell me, how will you ever bear the weight of all the lands you have taken from so many poor souls?" Her words, simple as they were, struck Mr. Silas Blackwood with the force of a physical blow. They echoed in his mind, over and over. How will you carry the weight? He stared at the impossibly heavy sack of soil at his feet. He looked at the frail old woman standing before him, her gaze steady and unwavering. He then looked around at her small, lovingly tended garden, her neat little cottage. Suddenly the soil in the sack seemed to represent something far greater than just dirt. It was a tangible symbol of all his actions. In that moment a profound understanding dawned upon him. He felt the true weight of his greed. It was not just the physical weight of the soil in Alara's sack. It was the accumulated weight of all the tears shed by the families he had dispossessed. It was the weight of their lost hopes, their shattered dreams, their years of hard work turned to dust by his clever schemes. It was the crushing burden of his own relentless ambition, an ambition that had blinded him to the suffering of others and left him feeling strangely empty despite all his possessions. He felt a coldness spread through him, a chilling recognition of his own character. For the very first time in many years, Mr. Silas Blackwood felt a deep, burning shame. His cleverness, once his greatest pride, now seemed like a twisted, ugly thing. His vast lands, his grand house, his accumulated riches, they all felt hollow and meaningless in the face of this simple truth. He saw the genuine pain in old Alara's eyes, a pain he had callously inflicted. He saw the immense value of her small piece of land, not in terms of money, but in terms of love, memory, and life. The heavy sack of earth had broken through the hard shell around his heart. Mr. Blackwood slowly, carefully, lowered the sack of earth back to the ground. He straightened up, no longer the proud, unyielding landlord. He looked at old Alara, and the sternness in his face had softened. There was a new expression there, one of regret, and perhaps the beginning of understanding. "You are right, Alara," he said, his voice much softer than she had ever heard it. It was barely above a whisper, filled with a new humility. "You are absolutely right." He paused, the weight of his realization settling upon him. "Keep your land, Alara," he continued, his voice gaining a little strength, but still gentle. "Keep your home. I was wrong. Terribly wrong." He looked around at her small garden, seeing its beauty and its meaning for the first time. "This land is yours. It holds too much of your life, too much of your heart, for anyone to take it away." As he spoke these words, Mr. Blackwood felt a strange sensation. It was as if a heavy burden, one he hadn't even realized he was carrying, had suddenly been lifted from his own shoulders. He felt lighter, freer. From that day forward, Mr. Silas Blackwood began to change. The encounter with old Alara and the heavy sack of earth had planted a seed in his heart. He started by returning some of the lands he had acquired through particularly unfair means. He sought out the families he had wronged and tried to make amends, offering help instead of demands. He learned, slowly but surely, that true wealth was not measured in the number of acres one owned, or the amount of gold in one's coffers. True wealth, he discovered, lay in a clear conscience, in kindness, and in being content with what one truly needed. The villagers were astonished by this transformation. At first, many were wary, suspecting another trick, but as time went on, they saw that Mr. Blackwood's change was genuine. He became a quieter, more thoughtful man, often seen helping in the community rather than taking from it, and old Alara continued to live peacefully in her little cottage, her vibrant garden a constant, gentle reminder to all. It showed that even a small patch of earth and a wise old woman could teach the greatest of lessons, that greed brings a heavy, unbearable burden, but contentment and kindness bring a light and joyful peace to the heart.